Round 5 of Norway chess featured some really enterprising play, but some bizarre blunders as well. First up, let's look at the game between Alexander Grischuk and Simon Augustine. Here, Augustine with black is 2 pawns up, but you can see his king is rather exposed. Grischuk really went on the attack in this game, played very aggressively. And here Augustine played his king up, so he's preempting the rook coming down here. Grischuk played this move anyway. And then Augustine advanced the pawn, and so Augustine has improved the situation of his bishop. But after this move, there's a threat of playing the queen down here, supported by the rook, and, well, black still has some problems there. So understandably, Augustine exchanged rooks. So after this, well, unfortunately for Augustine, he's losing one of his extra pawns, and here, with the opposite colour bishops, well, it's impossible for black to make progress. And in a few moves, they agree to draw. But if we just go back to the initial position, here Augustine actually missed a really crushing move. He could have taken the pawn on g2. He was kicking himself after the game for missing this. If king takes, then queen check, and then he picks up the rook. And here Augustine has 3 extra pawns, and of course with the exchange of rooks, then his king is in no danger at all. Well, in fact, it's white's king that's going to be in big trouble after a move like this. So completely winning for black. Also, after rook takes, if queen takes, first of all we take the bishop, it's check, the king has to move back, and then bishop here skewering rook and queen. And once black takes that rook, well, he's going to be completely winning. Once again, he's 3 pawns up. So, great pity for Augustine there. But, I mean, he still played an excellent game. This, I wouldn't categorise this as a bizarre blunder, more a missed opportunity, but good game from Augustine again. Okay, let's move on and look at the game between Vladimir Kramnik and Fabiano Caruana. Of course, Caruana leading the tournament going into this round. Now, Kramnik won a pawn in this endgame, and you can see he has the white pieces. Here's his extra pawn. Over the last few moves, he's been manoeuvring around, trying to make progress. But you can see here that black is pretty well placed. Caruana's bishop and rook tie white to defending that pawn, and it's not possible for white's king to break through here. So basically, Kramnik decided to have one last go here. He played a tricky move. He brought his rook back. Now his idea, if black just sits there, is to swing the rook round to the h-file and hassle the king, maybe attack this pawn. So obviously Caruana took off the b-pawn. Okay, but with the exchange of those bishops, then there's more of a possibility for white's king to break through. So first of all, the rook came behind this passed pawn, which of course Caruana protects. But now the king could come in covered by the rook. Now, black has to wait for the moment. His rook just has to keep defending that pawn. So a check. And now here, Caruana made a very strange mistake. If he drops his king back to f8, then actually Kramnik can't make any progress. For example, if the king comes here, then the king, it just gets checked away by the rook. Or if it comes to e6, again the rook checks. Well, if the king steps back, well, white's made no progress here. And if if after this check king comes to d7, then this is a clever move, so preventing white pushing for the moment, but also just threatening to take the pawn. So for example, if the king comes back to support the e-pawn, well, we take, the e-pawn advances, but well, it's no problem for black at all. So the rook protects the pawn and also threatens to give some checks here as well, and that should be a pretty easy draw for black. But what happened? Let's go back to this position. Instead of going back to f8, Caruana played king e8. Then the king came in. Now the difference this time is that after the check, the king was able to hide on this square. You can see it's covered by the rook, but also, of course, it's just threatening this pawn as well. And black can't hold on to both pawns. Here actually Caruana resigned. I mean, it's perhaps a little bit premature, but if, for example, the rook comes across to e6, then rook takes pawn, black takes this one, and white takes here. Now, this is actually a very easy win. It's not always the case that a rook and pawn against rook is a win, but here, this black king gets in the way. The king can't step in front of the pawn because the rook will just check it away. And here white king can shuffle down the board with the pawn, and that's winning for white. It's crucial that this king is on the so-called long side, and that prevents black's rook from coming across and checking the king, and in fact this is a very simple theoretical win. Alternatively, after king g7, well, if black protects his a-pawn, then of course white takes on g6. Now, this is still not a simple win, but, well, it should be winning for white. So, Kramnik actually went into the lead by defeating Caruana. Now, let's have a look at one more game, and that's the game between Magnus Carlsen and Levon Aronian. They often have fantastic scraps, and today was no exception. This game lasted no less than 93 moves, but we're not going to see all 93 moves. Afraid we haven't got time. We joined the game after 32 moves. Carlsen with the white pieces. Black dominates this position. You can see that Aronian has doubled his rooks on the f-file. That means this knight has problems moving, of course, because the rook will come down the board. Also, you can see that white's rooks are split. That's slightly odd. So just not working very well. The queen is also rather passive. Now, earlier on, quite cleverly, Aronian didn't take this pawn in front of his king. So although it looks as though black's king could be a little bit exposed, in fact it's not in any danger when that white pawn actually covers the king. So it was really very creative play from Levon Aronian, and in this position, well, Magnus Carlsen, after the game, admitted, he said, "I think I was thoroughly outplayed in the middle game." And here, if Aronian had found this pawn move, then he probably would have had a winning position. Well, for example, white has very few ideas in this position. Let's bring the rook back into play. But then this bishop, you can see how powerful that bishop is, looking down at this square. And then the queen comes in and something very nasty is going to happen. This knight has no moves, and rook f1, well, it's not, yeah, it's going to be a threat in this position. What else? If the queen comes here, well, this is a nice move actually. The rook can threaten to come across and take this pawn, and, well, black is just in complete control here. What about king here? Well, then the queen comes across, And actually white has problems on the back rank in this position. Here's a nice breakthrough, giving up the bishop, but after this then there's no decent defence to rook b1. So h5 would have been a very powerful move, just completely dominating white in this position. Instead, Aronian played his queen here, then queen here. Now it's probably still okay if he plays a tricky move, bishop b5, but instead he went for an endgame. I mean, this was an inexplicable decision, actually. After the exchange, then suddenly Magnus is back in the game. And now, watch what happens to this bishop. g4. Very good move. Before, we saw the bishop outside this pawn chain, very actively placed. Here, it's come behind that pawn, and it's so passive now. And now Carlsen begins to gain control. So after this, he actually manages to take and break through to black's king. Now the knight comes back into play, so it's back from the dead, and Carlsen starts to hassle black's king. You can see white's rook's very active now, and white's king has no problems here because it can always hide on h2 if necessary. So black's king very poorly placed, and now knight g3. Now what a transformation. Once again, this bishop very poor. And the knight now threatens to come in to f5. And as I said, the king can actually hide on this square h2, so it isn't in any danger. So Aronian played the bishop here to cover f5. Carlsen exchanged and played the rook to e6, threatening lots of lumps on the 6th rank. And then he took on h6. Now, I think white has a winning position here. It took Magnus a very long time to prove that it was a win. As I said, it went to 93 moves. But really, the writing was on the wall here, and Magnus has a winning position. So an extraordinary transformation, and Aronian just looked shattered after the game, actually. Now, in the other two games, Giri defeated Topalov, Svidler and Karyarkin drew, which means the scores after 5 rounds are Kramnik 3.5, Carlsen and Caruana on 3 points, Augustine, Giri, Karyarkin, Grischuk on 2.5. So the Magnus machine has started rolling. Still 4 rounds left.